What if the strongest way to dismantle ego isn't through argument, but through silence? What if the deepest power a woman can hold is not in chasing, explaining, or proving, but in standing unshaken? And what happens when that presence alone shatters illusions men thought would never crack? Welcome to time-tested advice, where ancient philosophy meets the modern world. I'm your host, Alfred. Let's get started. The most powerful form of resistance is stillness that cannot be moved. In a world that screams to be seen, the rare ones move in silence. They don't clamor for the spotlight, nor bend under pressure. They hold something far more disarming, stillness, and in that stillness lives a different kind of power. Today, I want to speak to you about the Sigma female, not the rebel, not the alpha, but the woman who holds herself with such calm, such emotional clarity that it doesn't just shift the room, it shatters the fragile egos of men who thrive on control. She doesn't argue, she doesn't attack. She simply stands as she is, and that in itself is a confrontation. In this exploration, we're uncovering 7 deep psychological, almost invisible ways a Sigma female dismantles a man's ego without ever raising her voice. 1. The mirror of stillness. There's something quietly unnerving about a woman who doesn't flinch, not when provoked, not when tested, not when tempted. A Sigma female is not defined by her reactions because she rarely offers any. And it's that non-reaction that becomes the most piercing response of all. When a man, especially one with a delicate ego, enters a space with her, he subconsciously seeks control through dominance, through charm, through exaggerated confidence. But when he tries to stir her, she doesn't move. No raised eyebrow, no flattered smile, no shift in posture, just presence. And that presence, it becomes a mirror. It doesn't argue, it reflects. When a Sigma woman meets arrogance, she doesn't shrink or confront. She simply is, and in her being she reflects the truth of the man standing before her. He's no longer in performance. He's now faced with himself. This is where the ego begins to shake, because the male ego, when fragile, needs engagement to survive. It feeds on attention, positive or negative. It thrives in drama. It loves being challenged because that means it's being seen. But when there's no challenge, no validation, no sign that he's even significant in her world, it falls apart. She becomes the void, and in that void, he starts to hear his own noise echo back. He wonders, why isn't she impressed? Why doesn't she respond? Why does her silence feel louder than my presence? This is what makes the Sigma female so profoundly threatening to egocentric men. Her stillness isn't emptiness, it's power. Power that doesn't need to be defended or explained. And when she looks at him without blinking, without flinching, without rushing to comfort his discomfort, she is telling him something louder than words ever could. I do not orbit you. She doesn't need to diminish him. She simply refuses to inflate him. And for a man whose identity depends on external inflation, that refusal is devastating. What makes it worse? She's not doing this to him. She's just being herself. That's the real disruption, because when your mere existence becomes a mirror too honest to look into, the only thing that shatters is the illusion. And for many men, that illusion was the ego. 2. The void of needlessness. The ego feeds on being needed. It craves it. Validation, admiration, emotional dependency. These are the invisible strings the fragile male ego pulls to feel relevant. But what happens when it meets a woman who does not reach, does not chase, does not need? Enter the Sigma female. A woman so self-contained that her mere indifference becomes a rejection. She doesn't reject him with cruelty. She doesn't belittle him or declare her independence in loud slogans. She just doesn't rely on him, not emotionally, not financially, not psychologically. And in a world where many men have been conditioned to feel powerful when they are needed, her detachment creates a silent collapse inside them. She doesn't beg, she doesn't hint, she doesn't even play hard to get. She's simply unavailable in a way that doesn't feel strategic. It feels spiritual. Her independence isn't a tactic, it's her natural state. And for a man used to being the center of the story, this is disorienting. He may try harder, turn up the charm, flex his status or knowledge, but none of it moves her. She appreciates him without clinging, enjoys presence without attachment, engages without dependence. To the ungrounded man, this feels like rejection. But it's not rejection, it's freedom, and not everyone is ready for that kind of liberation. Many men mistake interest for ownership. The Sigma female never agrees to those terms. She makes no promises, offers no illusions. She loves without losing herself, and when she walks away, she leaves whole because she never gave away pieces of herself in the first place. This is the void she creates, not a lack of love, but a lack of need. And in that void, the man is left with a haunting question: who am I when I am not being needed? This is where the ego cracks. Because if your worth was always tied to being her provider, her hero, her emotional lifeline, and she's none of those things with you, where does your worth go? She's not punishing him, she's just not performing the dance. And ironically, the more secure the man is, the more drawn he will be to this kind of energy, not because it challenges him, but because it invites him to meet her as an equal, not as a savior. But for the man whose confidence is built on control, her sovereignty will feel like abandonment, because to him, love has always meant being indispensable. She shows him another path, that the most loving thing a woman can do is to stand beside you without collapsing into you. And to many egos, that's the most devastating truth of all. 3. The gaze that sees too much. Some women flirt with their eyes. The Sigma female disarms with hers. She doesn't scan the surface. She penetrates the mask. She sees beyond the posture, the confidence, the words carefully chosen to impress. And what she sees is often more than a man wants to be seen, because deep down, many men don't want to be known. They want to be admired. And there's a difference. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to leave a like, comment, say hello, and consider subscribing to our channel. And if you'd like to support our channel further, you can find that in the description. Admiration allows the mask to stay on. It feeds the ego, but being seen, that requires vulnerability. The Sigma female carries a gaze that doesn't ask for your resume. It scans your frequency. She's not impressed by your achievements, your charm, or your persona. She's listening to the silence between your words. She's observing how you treat others when no one's watching. She's noticing what you avoid, and in that gaze, the ego finds no foothold because you can't perform your way into her affection. She's not drawn to the character. She's curious about the soul behind it. To the insecure man, this kind of seeing is unbearable because it strips away the layers he worked so hard to build. It reveals the fractures under the confidence, the fear behind the dominance, the boy inside the man, and unlike others, she doesn't judge what she sees. That's what makes it worse. She holds no expression of disgust, no pity, no praise, just presence, silent, unbothered presence. And when you're seen that clearly with no place to hide, your only choice is to either meet yourself or run. Most choose to run because in a world that rewards performance, To be seen without the costume is terrifying, especially when you've built your entire identity on the applause of others. Her gaze doesn't invite you to prove, it invites you to drop the act. But if you are your act, what remains? This is the existential wound her eyes open without even trying. She's not trying to read you. She just lives in a frequency where masks can't survive, and her gaze becomes a kind of gentle X-ray, exposing not what you do, but who you are. To some men, this feels like intimacy. To others, it feels like danger, because the ego cannot exist in an environment of radical truth. It needs illusion, and she doesn't offer that. She offers presence, she offers depth, she offers space. But space without illusion is too empty for the insecure. They need noise. They need mirrors that flatter, not mirrors that expose. So what happens when a man meets her gaze and sees himself reflected back, unfiltered? He begins to question his image, his status, his control, his value, not because she said a word, but because her seeing left no room for the false self to hide. That's the power of the Sigma female, not in words, not in gestures, but in attention so clear, so unclouded that it becomes a confrontation. A man may walk away thinking she's cold or distant or intense, but really, he just wasn't ready to be seen. 4. The graceful exit. Some people leave with fireworks, others leave with silence that burns longer than any sound ever could. The Sigma female chooses the second. She doesn't end things with drama, no shouting matches, no emotional monologues, no last-minute pleas or poetic goodbyes. She simply withdraws gently, quietly, completely, and that for the male ego, especially one intoxicated by control, is unbearable. See, most men are prepared for resistance. They're used to negotiating closure, to arguing their way back into favor, to the push-pull of emotional entanglement. They expect some kind of signal that they still matter, even if it's wrapped in anger or pain. But the Sigma female offers none of that. Her silence is not emptiness, it's a decision, and once she's made it, she doesn't circle back. To the unprepared man, this is emotional devastation, because there are no cues left to interpret, no words to misread, no loopholes to exploit. She doesn't ghost. She disappears with intention. She reclaims her space, not to punish, but because staying would be a betrayal of her peace. And make no mistake, she doesn't leave because she's broken. She leaves because staying would break her. To men accustomed to emotional volatility, this kind of exit feels alien. It makes them question, why didn't she fight? Why didn't she explain? Why didn't she need closure? The truth is, she already closed the door internally, long before she physically walked away. And when a woman like her detaches, it's not impulsive. It's been unfolding quietly, measured, final. This too shatters the ego, because the ego doesn't understand endings without drama. It craves significance even in collapse. But the Sigma female doesn't end stories to prove anything. She ends them because peace is non-negotiable. And her version of peace requires one crucial element: space. Space from noise, from emotional obligation, from dynamics that require her to become less in order to be loved more. She doesn't explain her exit because her boundary already said enough. She doesn't answer your texts at midnight. She doesn't keep the door half open just in case. She leaves like fog lifting from a mountain. No announcement, just absence, clear, inevitable, permanent. For the man left behind, this can feel like erasure, like he never mattered, like the entire relationship dissolved without warning. But that's not what happened. He just wasn't paying attention when her energy began to shift, when her presence began to dim. when her responses turned from curiosity into neutrality. She gave signs. They were just quiet ones. And now that she's gone, really gone, he begins to feel the weight of her absence, not just the loss of her attention, but the loss of something more haunting: access. Access to her mind, to her energy, to the feeling of being around someone who doesn't need you to be anything other than real. And the cruelest part, for the ego? She doesn't look back. She doesn't check his stories. She doesn't stalk, regret, or rewrite the ending in her mind. She just lives fully, softly, elsewhere. Her graceful exit is her final message. I do not argue for my peace. I choose it. And when a man realizes that her silence wasn't a power move, but a self-preservation instinct, it hits deeper than any insult ever could, because he finally sees she was never trying to win. She was just done playing, and that kind of exit leaves the ego with nothing to hold on to. 5. The vibe of unreachable. Some people build walls to keep others out. The Sigma female doesn't need walls. Her energy already tells you can't enter unless you've earned the key. And the key, it's not charm, not confidence, not success. It's depth. What unnerves the ego most about her isn't that she's distant. It's that she's whole. She walks through the world like someone who's already chosen herself. Someone who's not waiting to be rescued, completed, or claimed. Someone who isn't asking for permission to exist or approval to matter. And that makes her feel unreachable. Not cold, not arrogant, just not accessible to those who are still playing surface-level games. She doesn't flirt for validation. She doesn't entertain for attention. She doesn't belong to the emotional marketplace most people operate in. You don't win a Sigma female. You meet her where she already is, or not at all. To the ego, this is maddening, because ego thrives in pursuit. It needs someone to impress, to seduce, to conquer. But how do you conquer someone who isn't trying to be caught? How do you impress someone who isn't watching? How do you claim a woman who already belongs to herself? The answer is, you don't. The Sigma female is not a prize. She's not the reward at the end of a performance. She's the one who left the room before the show even started. And because she isn't looking to be chosen, she naturally becomes the most magnetic woman in the space. There's an irony in this. The more detached she is, the more they chase. But not because she's playing hard to get. She's just already got herself. And when a man whose ego is used to being the center finds himself orbiting someone who doesn't even acknowledge the pull, he starts to spiral. He may question her. Why doesn't she open up more? Why isn't she more emotionally available? Why does she feel so untouchable? But what he's really asking is, why don't I have power over her? That's the ego's question, because the soul recognizes her. The soul respects her boundaries. The soul doesn't fear her fullness. But the ego, it panics, it scrambles for relevance, it tries to provoke, impress, argue, seduce, and the Sigma, she observes, she listens. Then, if the energy doesn't feel aligned, she simply steps away, not out of malice, but because she has no appetite for noise. Her unreachability is not a shield. It's a signal to the world. Only those who come with sincerity, depth, and self-awareness are welcome in her space, and most egos are not ready for that kind of welcome, so they label her cold or intimidating or too much. But what she really is beyond the ego's reach, and that's what destroys it. Not because she tried, but because she never needed to. 6. The weight of her restraint. A fragile ego expects reaction. It feeds on it. The Sigma female, however, denies it that nourishment. She doesn't rush to defend herself when misjudged. She doesn't waste energy proving her worth when questioned. Her restraint is not weakness, it's mastery. By refusing to be pulled into petty conflicts, she forces others to sit with their own projections. This unsettles the ego, because without her response, its illusions collapse under their own weight. Her silence forces self-reflection where once there was distraction, and in that vacuum of restraint, truth speaks louder than any defense. 7. The paradox of her softness. To the ego, power is often loud, forceful, or domineering. But the Sigma female's power is wrapped in softness, a softness that does not submit, but does not need to fight either. She can smile with gentleness, even as she enforces her boundaries with steel. She can extend compassion without inviting exploitation. And this paradox disarms the ego because it cannot categorize her. She is both tender and unyielding, and the combination makes control impossible. In her softness, she is untouchable. Wisdom seekers, if you've stayed with me until now, you already know this wasn't about power games or gender politics. It was about energy, presence, truth. The Sigma female isn't trying to prove herself. She's remembering herself, and that remembrance has consequences, especially for those who haven't yet remembered who they are. If anything in this spoke to you, sit with it, breathe with it. You don't need to rush into action. Wisdom doesn't rush, and if your soul is still whispering, calling you back to something quieter, older, softer, I invite you to honor it. Until next time, stay still, stay awake, stay soft, and walk your way. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'm your host, Alfred, and I read every comment.